Hey there, this is Pat Ennis of Ennis Legacy Partners. Welcome to the Exit Readiness podcast. I'm here with business partner Corby McGordon, who's sitting in for co-host Walter Dial today. Our mission here on the podcast is to provide you, the business owner, with subject matter expertise on topics pertaining to building transferable or sellable business value and then planning for your eventual exit from the business. We want to help you build a business that is transferable and then exit successfully on your own terms and conditions. Our topic today is naming a successor that's a bit difficult, which is actually a quote that you might recognize from Logan Roy, who is the business titan played by Brian Cox in the popular award-winning HBO series Succession. If you're not familiar with the series, it centers on the Roy family, and the dysfunctional Roy family, owners of Waystar Royco, which is a global media and entertainment conglomerate, and then how these family members fight for control in light of the uncertain health of the family patriarch, Logan Roy. Logan, throughout the series, from the very beginning and throughout, is portrayed as this ruthless, mean, explosive guy, and as a titan with few, if any, equals. And he regularly launches psychological missiles, if you will, at his kids out of spite and strategically, which lends toward the dysfunctionality within the family. Layer that on top of just the individual ambitions, which are not few or insignificant, and you have a real mess. And a big question and challenge being focused by Logan is one that we've talked about on this podcast many times. Which of these flawed individuals should should be his successor in controlling the company that he's built, this big, massive company? Now, most of our listeners, small business, I don't know that we have many Logan Roys listening today, but we certainly have listeners, and you have the same maybe dynamics and the same circumstances happening in your business, maybe just not to the same on the same scale that Logan is having to deal with. So today we're going to have some fun discussing the Roy family saga and some of the transferable psychological and emotional considerations you might experience in your business succession situation. And we're excited to have with us guest Elizabeth Carr Ph.D. and Attorney Cherie Morris. Elizabeth, who we've known for a number of years now, is the founder of Kentlands Psychotherapy, which she launched in 2005 after serving 6 years as a Navy Clinical Psychologist. She continues to see some existing clients, but really most of her time, her role is mostly one of leadership, administration, mentoring, supervision, and just growing a business, really. Cherie is a lawyer and now a full-time conflict coach and transformational mediator. I hope I got that part right, Cherie. You can correct me in a minute. She's a student of relationships, and her expertise in advising individuals and couples. She has expertise in advising individuals and couples, and of course, business owners on communication and then co-parenting, as well as helping families and small businesses resolve conflict. You can learn more about Cherie at Recompose Us, www.recompose.us. And we're going to ask them for contact information toward the end of the conversation today, so they'll have an opportunity to share that with you again. So, ladies, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you with us today. We're looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you.
And I think, Corby, you're on mute, my friend.
Yep. So we've been excited about this one. And let's start with, Succession is not a reality TV show, obviously. It is drama at its most grandiose almost. And so, Elizabeth, you pitched this idea. And why was it that you thought that, okay, this kind of almost extreme example would really be helpful to apply to a local DMV business owner?
Absolutely. Well, let me just start by saying I love you guys, and Corby has been so helpful to me in my own business, my own exit planning. And I love listening to Pat's podcast. And one of the things that Pat talks about on a regular basis is this idea of, when you own a business, is it going to go to your kids? Is it going to go to a key player? And in this show, although it's hyperbolic, the core struggle is one that I think all of us deal with our own hands on this elephant, right? Which is when that patriarch or business owner so emotionally is invested in the company going to one of their children who may or may not be a good fit. And also opening up their mind to the possibility that maybe none of the kids are a good fit. Maybe none of the kids really want the business. And what about a key player, which all of that is addressed in this show. And I thought, since you all deal with exit planning, Cherie absolutely does a wonderful job with families when they're struggling with these kind of issues. And sometimes I see them in the therapy session when they're talking about the struggle with a family member in their family business. And since all of us, like I said, have a hand on this kind of elephant, I thought it would be fun for us to get together and use this extreme example of the show to talk about some of these very common issues.
Very good. Yeah, and along that line, Cherie, as you watch the show, are there times where you just go, oh, I could help with that? Let's sit down and talk to so-and-so.
Yes, Corby, absolutely. It's really fascinating, the dynamic. Also, sometimes you go, oh my goodness, did they really just do or say that? Because that's real life. We all are just flawed human beings, right? Doing our best to navigate our businesses, our personal lives. And then when you have the intersection of that, a family business, wow, right? It can be explosive. And in this case, in Succession, what I particularly see with Logan Roy, he doesn't necessarily want to give up control. Is that the understatement of the year? But he needs to, because, it is a family business, but it's also a public business, and they're majority shareholders, but don't have necessarily all the control. So they need to make decisions, but he's a reluctant participant. But if he had someone like us, right, we would at least help him think about what his values are, what he wants to be next, and how to evaluate these players who are in fact his own children, rather than sort of manipulate everyone around him in the only way he knows how, really, right? He's a very good businessman, which is terrific, but doesn't always make for seamless relationships.
Right. Yeah. And you mentioned that there's this element of he just doesn't want to give up control. How do you actually start moving somebody along that path? And even as business owners are listening, how might they identify it in themselves?
Yeah, and can I add something to that? So I haven't watched the whole thing. I've watched a few episodes here and there. And one of the episodes I watched was the one where he was confronted with the decision, which many owners are. Do I sell? And there were a lot of really, really good reasons to sell. Matter of fact, I was sitting there like you all probably, sell
Right.
Sell it.
But he decided against doing that, even though not any of these kids really are just clear-cut
Candidates, right?
Fantastic candidates.
Yeah.
So in light of what Corby just asked, how do you move them along, particularly when it seems like you're about ready to make you're overestimating your kids here, and you should maybe consider selling.
Yeah. So if I may, Pat and Corby, really, at the heart of the matter, right? Really great question. And I think one of the first things we can do is sit down with the business owner and find out more about them, find out what their values are, have them identify for us their strengths. And if we can't get them to identify weaknesses, at least their challenges, right? We all have them. And then, as you said, they may not have a qualified child, but they also may be minimizing the capacity of their child from the family relationship, right? So let's really be more objective and understand we can help with that by laying out, what the kids have done, how they've allowed them to take on challenges in the business, if at all, how that could happen now. And then also identifying those key players, right? So that we can really begin to lay out in a more objective fashion, along with their subjective lens, what might be best for this business and for their lives, because we can't negate that it's really important in this show that Logan still has control. So even though he doesn't want to sell for that very reason, right? He becomes marginalized. And I think he also recognizes, or feels like he would. I think he also thinks his kids, what are they going to do? They may not have very good skills, but without the business, they have no opportunities potentially. Again, an exaggerated version of what may happen in real life. So I think the idea of doing a more objective analysis, recognizing if nothing has to happen at this moment, let's talk to the kids too. Let's figure out what they want, what their parent or other relative wants for them, and then maybe allow them to participate in a real significant way, not in a way managed just by Logan Roy.
And I think also one of the things that I love that you guys have talked about in the past in your podcast is that succession planning starts years in advance. In season 1, Logan Roy has a stroke. And there is a catastrophic sort of emergency question about who is the successor. And although 2 of his sons are somewhat working in the business, you all have talked before about you have to give those potential successors real autonomy to make decisions, even if they might be wrong decisions, even if they might mess up. You have to give them that leeway in the process of preparing them to take over. And when you look at this story, it seems like he's years behind the 8 ball in that process. And I'm wondering, Pat and Corby, if you guys can speak to that in what you've seen on the show of how far behind the 8 ball do you think he is in that process?
Yeah, well, yeah, that's very insightful, Elizabeth. I would expect such insight from you, actually. Of course I would. Yeah, he's a little bit behind it. I mean, his pattern, it seems, and you're the psychologist, although we have to be, somewhat psychologists in the work that we do, and until we really need to bring the big guns like you in. He seems to have a strategy of beating down rather than building up, and almost creating context where the kids end up needing Cherie because he creates conflict almost among the family, and then he does things that does not at all encourage them in their giftings, talents, and skills, and maybe even too much controls the still is very much in control of what he actually even assigns them to do in their jobs. So I don't know how much leeway they have to actually make mistakes without him coming in hard and heavy. So I think he's way behind the 8 ball, and it just seems like he does everything contrary. He's a contrarian to what we would think would be the right approach to identifying and then training up your successor. And to your point, Elizabeth, over a good amount of time. Corby, what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, my thought goes to there's actually, I think, 2 facets to this. One, what jumps out is the sheer business process of needing to start way ahead of time. But then there's the, as a dad of adult children, even, you just see how he's just so missed it in his parenting. And so I actually had a question back for you, Elizabeth, thinking about, it's obviously extreme, but at the same time, those dynamics probably do exist in a lot of families. Is it possible to actually kind of coach both at the same time, the family relationships, as well as navigating the business relationships? And how would you help, say, a more mild version of this family?
Yes. Well, and I think that's exactly right. one of the things that I love about Cherie is Cherie's very much of a cup is half full kind of person. And I think you're absolutely right that if we want our kids to be their very best, we have to see their potential and nurture it and be encouraging. And that is something that Logan fundamentally does not seem to understand. And all of his kids in their own ways seem to be suffering because of it. And I thought it was sort of interesting that his daughter, being the youngest and being female, doesn't seem to be on his radar, particularly in season 1 as a potential successor. Although if you look at them on paper, she might be the most qualified or have the best potential. And so I think part of that is maybe in some ways that she's the least beat down by her father, right? And I think one of the things that I imagine that Cherie would do, and Cherie, I'd love to hear your thoughts about this, is gently and diplomatically coaching the father on how to bring out the best in his kids.
Absolutely, Elizabeth, and thanks for asking how I would work on this, because I think it's really important that we separate the coaching from the therapeutic. And I say that because Elizabeth does a tremendous job with clients, as does everyone at Kentlands Psychotherapy, but not everything requires therapy. What we're really trying to do is separate these threads. As I started with the idea that, you know, you've got the business and you have the personal, it's the intersection of those two that gets very complicated. Yeah. So we start talking and we figure out what, for example, the business owner's goals are, and then we start talking objectively about the qualities, characteristics of each of their children, in consideration, not as they imagine them to be, but objectively what they've done in the world, where they are. I mean, one thing you notice, you know, if you've watched some of the show, is that, for example, Kendall, his second eldest, since his eldest is marginalized by the fact of that divorce, is really, you know, a complicated guy. He obviously has serious addiction issues. And every time he's about to do something pretty accomplished, his dad reminds him of his failures, right? And how he is just an addict and how he's had to rescue him. Well, we really need to sit down and talk about, what does addiction mean here? Are you in recovery? How long have you been sober? Rather than, you know, again, the exaggerated version of dad saying, you know, you're a screw up, there's no hope for you, you can't be redeemed. We need to really separate that. And we don't need necessarily a therapist to do that, but we need to be explicit about it. We need to make explicit some of our implied assumptions. Do you think your son can't do this because of his history of addiction? If so, what help has he gotten and where are we now? And again, coaching can involve teaching someone like Logan, maybe not, but maybe someone like Logan or a milder version of him, how not to relate to his kids in that very negative way. So I think it's important that resources like Kentlands Psychotherapy exist to do the deeper work when it's required, right? Let's figure out how your relationship with your mother impacts, right, what you are now and how that's working or not working for you. But the coaching process in this business succession model allows us to make explicit things people aren't talking about, and then use those things as we move forward for succession planning.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So then, Cherie, if we have business owners listening that are, you know, microcosms, what would you tell a business owner to do today to start actually walking down that path of understanding their kids and, you know, beginning the process even, you know?
Corby, that's a great question. And one of the things that you were talking about with Elizabeth early on is exactly what they should be doing, talking about it now, thinking about it now. It may sound self-serving to say, call one of us, but truly call one of us, because what we can do is start the conversation, help you start the conversation. I really find, you know, in my own family system, I'm not always the one to do it, right? So we all need some support with that. So getting outside help, an objective eye lends itself to the subjective lens. So we have both really important components going on at the same time. Start the conversation, which can be a really hard thing to do. You know, if you have had a dysfunctional system for a pretty long time, but maybe it's served certain participants in it. But if you take the step, I think you will find that my clients say you find more success, but also more peace, more joy. And that's ultimately why we all have these businesses, right? We're looking for our purpose and our meaning. And I think that's what this kind of work can do for business owners.
Yep.
And Pat and Corby, I was really curious to hear from both of you what you think about the way they proposed the attorney, and maybe Cherie, you could remind me, what is her name? Jerry, the attorney, as kind of a bridge temporary successor while the kids get more up to speed. And do you see that in real life, having a key player be put in place to take on that mantle until a child is really ready to really fully be in charge?
Yeah, we don't see it very often because we're working with smaller businesses and oftentimes they're just ready to move ahead, Elizabeth. But that's a great question, and actually, it can be a very effective strategy. I think if the owner wants to pull back from day to day sooner rather than later, and everyone on the team knows that the eventual end game is for the daughter or the son to take over the business, but they're not ready, and everyone knows that too. There's been some objective analysis along the lines of what we're talking about here, and so on and so forth. And there is another key player who's got the chops, if you will, to lead the day-to-day, but they don't, for whatever reason, they just may not want to be an owner, or maybe they're a minority owner now, but they don't want to buy the business, and they know they're not going to be able to anyway. So anyway, it can be a very effective strategy, I think, if rightly done and rightly communicated, as you've been talking about here. Boy, communication is so foundational and essential to all of this. Clear, ongoing, clear expectations, follow through, and so that would be, in order for it to work, again, communication would have to be very effective.
One thing I want to just add here to this element of the conversation, because it seems relevant, while doing some research for this podcast, I noticed some data that suggests our ambivalent relationships are the worst for our health. So I think a worry that many business owners have is that starting the conversation makes it worse, right? But in fact, having relationships in which there is clarity, which is a word you just used, Pat, which I love, actually is better for our health. Not just for our business, but for our lives. So I think bringing clarity to these very ambivalent relationships. I mean, the daughter Shiv has her contact profile picture for her father on her phone is Saddam Hussein, right? Like, if that's not ambivalence. And I say that because she also is seeking his love, right? Like, that's the theme of the show. So, that's not good for anyone. And so bringing it into the sunlight, as they say, really does help us. There's research to prove it. So I think if we could make that point to business owners, I think the clarity issue and the communication is really a good thing. It's not, easy, but it's pretty simple. Let's dig in.
Yeah, so it can be healthy from every which angle you look at it. The one thing I would say about that, about bringing it up sooner rather than later or early in the process, we absolutely advocate for that. At the same time, though, being careful not to make commitments early on that you're not certain can be fulfilled, which often happens, it's certainly a common occurrence where an owner, and actually it can be with key employees as well, where at least verbal commitment, and it may be in what the owner considers to be a casual conversation, or more casual or informal conversation, whereas the one on the other side of the table, be it a key employee or a child, receives it as, oh, that's fantastic. Yes, I want that. Let's just get it. We'll get it down on paper at some point. But right now, I heard what you're saying. I heard what actually you're not saying, but you're saying that I'm going to be the successor of this business. Yeah. So, okay, boy, 30 minutes has just flown. But let's keep going for a few more minutes, if you don't mind, because we got a couple more questions. I'm sure we do. Hey, can we flip the coin? You gave some great best practices a few minutes ago, Cherie, for owners, that's who we work with. But I think when it comes to some of these succession questions, every once in a while, we may have some potential successors listening in. Would you have any best practices that maybe you could suggest to either one of you or both of you as to the successor side of the table?
Well, an obvious one based on the TV show is Kendall, right? Because his approach is to try to overthrow, right, the despot. And that to me perhaps should not be your first go-to, right? Like, let's figure out another plan so that you're not destroying your personal relationship with your father. Now, ironically, Logan respects that, right? So there, you do learn, right, from the father. But I think that the idea is try to start the communication that you want, even with a difficult business owner or one that it's a complicated, ambivalent relationship, so that you're not put in a position to have to, overthrow the king. So that's a best practice. I think for Roman, who's the younger son, who's sort of the court jester in a way in this, family scenario, I think showing what you can do and maybe from my perspective, getting the therapy you need to be the man that you can be, right? Because he obviously has a lot going on in the background. So doing your own work in the context of the larger family system, understanding what has happened, that part about the relationship with your mother might matter, and here, obviously, your father, so that you can assert yourself in positive ways. And for Shiv, she has this complicated relationship with her fiance and then husband. What's going on for her? Why did she leave entirely to be on the opposite side of the political spectrum of her father? So if you could see each of the children, and also let's not forget Connor, the eldest, who, is now running for president to kind of seek some glory he couldn't gain within the family. I would recommend all the participants do your own work in the background and start the conversation with the business owner so that you can show up as your best self.
I love what Cherie's saying about starting the conversation too, because it seems to me like if you look at that first episode in season 2, where Logan is promising really the CEO position to his daughter, which I don't think he consistently follows through with following seasons. But she says, how come you never offered this to me before? And you could turn that around to say, what did she express to him in her interest prior to this? How was she able to? And, I know that this character is an intimidating character, but I think for your listeners, if you are a child in a family-owned business and you have some hopes and dreams and aspirations, you need to be really clear with your parent on what you see as your future role so that you can start that negotiation.
Yeah, and Elizabeth, along these lines, just the question came to mind. I'm an engineer, so I want to start something to fix something, right?
Yeah.
But I'd love your opinion on, as we talk about these conversations beginning, even, just in setting expectations, awareness of issues and clarity versus expected change, because this family's a mess, obviously. And, could you just speak to the significance of awareness as well as then potential for change?
So, if these kids were going to try to have a conversation with their father, for example, they would probably be well served to work with the therapist in advance, because we're not going to diagnose him today, but he has a very strong personality, their dad, and he's very confident in himself. And he can be quite abrasive and harsh. And you cannot be a shrinking violet around him if you're going to have a successful conversation. You have to really have a steel rod in your back. And so to get some support to be able to advocate for yourself and assertively and confidently, and not get dissuaded just because he tells you to piss off or things like that, I think it would be really important. And understanding who he is an important, I think, piece of how to work with someone, to understand their style and how you can best negotiate with anybody in their particular style.
Yeah, very good. Cherie's words are kind of early on. She said, we're all flawed human beings. And what I hear you saying is that awareness to recognize we are, and we all need help in stuff. Yeah. Let's get some help alongside to prop us up.
Yeah, let's get the right help. And,
Yep.
and so we're going to ask you in a second or two, any final thoughts, words of wisdom for owners who have these challenges of the emotional challenges, but also the either real or potential conflict resolution challenges. But here's a question one question before that question. When I've watched the show, I've thought, okay, I could tell us an owner, watch this show, watch the owner, pay attention to him, and you'll learn everything not to do. Would you say that, or would you nuance it in some way? Both of you, if both of you could answer that question.
So if I may, I was thinking in the background as Elizabeth was answering the question for Corby. And one thing I think Logan does really well is testify before Congress or have a business meeting with non-family members or key players. So in other words, we're not diagnosing him as a narcissist, not today, but he definitely has people-pleasing qualities, although that may not be evident immediately, right? So he does know how to talk to people in power, more power than he has that may impact him. That's not an unimportant quality. I've seen business owners who can't do that, right? So that's a quality that I think we can attend to and notice, and that he has developed a skill set to do that, which also I think portrays his competence and his confidence on the show. So that's one quality I notice that he has and that he does well.
That's very insightful.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, would you add anything?
One thing I would say in terms of advice to your listeners is that all of us as business owners have to keep our mind open with regard to this succession planning. And we might have our hearts set on a particular key player or an adult child. And I think sometimes if we get overly invested in something, we close down our options prematurely. And so I think that's one thing that is a challenge for all of us as business owners, is keeping that a loose grip on the idea of who it's going to be when it's still very early in the process, and to not have a premature kind of investment in one particularly because I think in my experience as a business owner talking to you all, it really helped me to open up my mind to a range of options that I hadn't even considered, because you don't know what you don't know. And I think that's why talking to exit planners such as yourself can be so helpful, because as business owners, we don't know all of the options, and you run through them really nicely. I like when you say, Pat, every business is going to end one of these half a dozen ways, all of them. And to really keep our mind open to all of those potential options so that we have the best possible outcome for ourselves.
Yes, thank you, Elizabeth. Yes, that's absolutely. We're agnostic as to how an owner leaves. We just want to help them figure out the best strategy that's going to accomplish all their goals. And that last episode that I watched, I would have been telling Logan Roy, you need to sell this right now.
Yeah.
I think we got you hooked, Pat.
No, I don't know if I'm hooked. But anyway, okay, so as we wrap up, and thanks for going a few extra minutes with us here. We really appreciate that. The time just flew talking about this with the two of you. Any final words of wisdom and direction for listeners?
So I would say start the conversation. I think that's been a theme of what we've talked about. Reach out to any of us, and we will help you find the right resource, which is also a big part of what I do in my conflict resolution business. If I think an individual or part of a system needs a therapeutic piece, I'm going to send them to Kentlands Psychotherapy. If they need you guys, I'm going to send them to you guys, right? Like, this is what we need to do, is give people resources. And when you sit in your own office with your own business, it's sometimes hard to see that. So I think opening up the conversation, not just with your family and key players, but also with outside people, can help you do better for yourself.
I agree. I can't add a thing to that. That was beautiful.
Okay, well, fantastic. Let's get the conversation started, listeners. And that's not the first time you've heard that on this show, but or on this podcast. But okay, well, thank you so much. This was fantastic. Of course, we knew it would be. We're going to have you back. It's too much fun not to. Is there anything you'd like to promote today, either one of you? And then also provide your contact information.
So people can find more about the work I do at a website, www.recompose.us. It's Recompose Us. They can find my contact information there, set up a no obligation discovery session. I'm happy to talk to you, to meet you first and figure out if this is a good conversation for you. And there are resources on the website. There's a blog. Bring your questions to us. We want to hear from you.
Very good. Thank you, Cherie. Elizabeth?
Yeah, I would say if you are listening today and you're really hurting about a family relationship, that you're in business with a family member and you need someone to talk to about it, give us a call. Let's talk about it. Let's see if a therapist is what you need, or maybe Cherie is enough for what you need, but we can sort that out, and we're happy to talk to you for 20 minutes on the phone and see where your needs are. And KentlandsPsychotherapy.com.
Fantastic. Thank you to both of you. We really appreciate it. And just let us know when you think you should come back on to give us an
when we
update.
find the next fun show, we'll reach out again, right?
An update from Logan and the whole team. Okay.
Yes,
We'll get back together and keep the conversation going, as they like to say these days. All right. So listeners, if you want help maximizing the value of your business, building a transferable business, or planning for your eventual exit, you can reach Walter, who's not with us today, but normally is, at 301-951-9090, or Corby and myself at 301-859-0860. You can also access resources at exitreadiness.com, grfcpa.com, and nslp.com. As always, thank you for listening. And until next time on the Exit Readiness podcast, this is Pat Ennis and Corby McGordon. Pat Ennis and Corby McGordon. He's only my business friend. Signing off. Thank you.